You know, one of the reasons I hate the whole copy wrong thing is I'm not trying to steal Star Trek's music. I'm not trying to say that I made Star Trek's music. I'm not trying to, you know, do any illegal or criminal or otherwise morally unacceptable things with regards to Star Trek. And yet, right now, I can't play for you some Star Trekky music because otherwise I'll get copyright flagged. I don't want to get too much into that topic again. It's just I was thinking about that. It's like I really want to have some good background music going for this, but I can't have Star Trek music because screw you. So please enjoy listening to the music that I can play. That does not involve copy wrong issues. All right, so put on my Star Trek uniform for today. This is as close to a uniform as I have for the moment, till I lose some more weight. Another 40 pounds or so, and I'll be where I want to be. Um, Shoo, I have a question for you guys. How many of you? No, we're still working on it, One. That's the answer to that. So we're gonna do things just a little bit differently. Uh, Yes, little Billy. Dun, 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 dun. So we're gonna do things a little bit differently. I have stuff I want to talk about. In fact, I have my notes right here that I was taking, and am ready to go on. And I want to hit a few things before we really jump forward. So let me hit those few things right off the bat, especially for our YouTube viewers. First of all, obviously, if the title is not clear, there will be spoilers everywhere. If you don't want spoilers for this movie, please, please, please do not watch this video. As ever, that does not just mean spoilers as in it was his sled, but spoilers as in we're discussing concepts and character moments and all that stuff, spoiling the movie rather than the more literal definition of spoiling a twist in the movie. Obviously, I will be spoiling twists in the movie, but that's not the point I'm trying to make, okay? So just getting that clear. Awesome music. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Second thing, I know some people have asked me for a no spoiler just real quick what I think, and that's why I want to put this right at the beginning, so anybody who doesn't want to spoil the rest of it or wants to watch the rest of it later can get my opinion very, very quickly. So here's my opinion very, very quickly. It was a good movie. Anything else, any more detail, requires me going into it. It was a net positive. But it was not an overwhelming positive. It was a net positive. So, yeah. Just a heads up on that. So that's our no. That's the end of our no spoilers. Spoilers are now everywhere. Spoilers everywhere. Spoilers everywhere. Javan, you suck. So the next thing I want to talk about is a disclaimer. As any of you who follow my Twitter, if you don't, you should totally follow my Twitter. The more people will follow it, the more often I'll use it, I swear. It's a great way to get a hold of people quickly and easily, especially now that I have a phone. So, those of you who follow my Twitter know, I actually watched the new Star Trek movie in the VIP seats. For those of you who don't know what I mean by VIP seats, it's basically like a big old comfy recliner. I'm serious. It's this big old recliner. Actually, actually has the kick-out feet and everything. It's very comfortable. And this is even more... Yes, I have Oldrith. And this is even more important for me personally. For those of you who've been watching me for any length of time, and I mean, like, since I started streaming, like 3-4 years. Hi, Vandalia, back ago. You see this pillow right here? This pillow is here because this is where I like to rest my arms. The most comfortable thing for me, for my body, for my makeup, for my gargantuan arms, is to rest my arms in front of me rather than on the armrests. Armrest is something I can do if I'm trying to look professional or whatever, but this actually isn't nearly as comfortable as right here. The VIP thing, the VIP seats have this rotating table thing that goes right here. So I can rest my arms like this while watching a movie. So I was very comfortable in a recliner with my arms rested in front of me. So I was very, very, very comfortable. And of course, I did that on purpose because usually I only get VIP tickets for movies that are, worth it. But in this case, my logic was either the movie is going to be good and I'll be comfortable while enjoying it, or the movie is bad and I'll be comfortable while not enjoying it. Hedging my bets kind of a situation. But as a disclaimer, My opinion of this movie was probably changed, at least somewhat, because of the fact that I was comfortable while watching it. Speaking of disclaimers, next disclaimer. I walked into this movie expecting it to not be good. I really did. I walked in thinking, I'm not going to like this. The odds of it being a good movie are low. Part of that was because of the first trailer, which was terrible. Part of that was because Star Trek in general has kind of been nosediving lately, to just to be blunt. And there's a bunch of other reasons. We've actually discussed this. I mean, we've been talking about our hopes and fears for Star Trek for some time. Seriously, Jovan? That's ridiculous. So I walked into the movie like this isn't going to be good. And as I've said many, many times, there is actually a thing where if you're expecting a negative and it's okay, then you're more positively inclined towards it than you otherwise would be. So, there's my disclaimers. Hi, Spirit of Memory. Hang on just a second. I just got a response on the YouTube 116 episode restoral thing. Maybe. What? Ugh. So, nothing, in other words. Meh. Whatever. Okay, no actual news. 116 is probably just gone forever. Okay, so those are the first few things I wanted to talk about. Hang on, what's the next thing I want to talk about? Okay, so there's the next thing I want to talk about is interpretive works. How many of you out there like Batman versus Superman, the recent movie that came out this year? Genuine question. I want to know. Yes, Eruan. It's gone. I have no copy of it. It's permagon, erased from history. I'm not joking. It sucks. The only reason I'm saying this so flippantly is because I've already gotten over the grief of the situation because it was a good damn episode. It was the finale of Pandoria and it's freaking deleted. Anyways. I have not seen the Ultimate cut yet, by the way, but I do actually like BVS. My great grandson Pax has seen the Ultimate cut, and he's explained to me some of the changes. And overall, I think the changes are awesome. So I will probably pick up the Ultimate cut and watch it because I already liked the base film. So from what I understand, I'm going to really like the Ultimate cut. The reason I bring this up, how many of you who liked it consider yourselves either or Batman or Superman fans? You know, comic fans, in other words. I'm going somewhere with this, I swear. Air conditioning. Thank God. It's been so hot lately. I know that's true in, like, most of the United States right now, but holy crap. It has been warm. Very warm lately. Okay, so I see Eruan liked it, Darkrai liked it. No, there's a pretty specific problem, Zawan, that happened. And it's ironically unique because this is probably one of the only episodes that would have happened to. There's actually 4 episodes in the whole lore run that I could have lost in this way, and it just happened to be that one. If it was any other episode that was deleted or whatever, I would have been fine. Because I have the rest of the episodes locally. Anyways, so the reason I ask this is probably the biggest point to be made is that soups didn't really act like soups, and bats didn't really act like bats, right? Like, I think most of us, even those of us who actually enjoy the movie, can agree that really just was not Batman, and that just really was not Superman, right? That that's not them. This was a interpretation of the characters. In fact, actually, I've got a bigger example of that. Even if you argue that that is Bats and that is Soups, most people would not argue that Lex was definitely an interpretation of the character, right? So the reason I bring this up, let me use another example. Let me really build up to this point. Lord of the Rings, okay? And The Hobbit. The movies, specifically. How many of you out there liked the Lord of the Rings trilogy or the Hobbit trilogy? Or both? I'll go ahead and raise my hand on this, by the way, because I liked both. Go ahead, hate me for my opinion. It's okay. I get it literally every day. But I liked the Lord. I loved the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I liked the Hobbit trilogy. I really did. Most of you guys are probably already seeing where I'm going with this, but I do have something I wanted to discuss. Um, the thing I want to discuss is the fact that I have been a long-standing proponent of interpretive works. Okay, I use both of these examples because both of them are not the same as their source material. It has been argued that that wasn't Batman, that that was not a Batman and Superman movie. It has been argued that that was not a Lord of the Rings movie. It has been argued that that was not a Hobbit movie. The one, believe it or not, it was literally just a screw up. No copy wrong, no nothing. Just an accident, nothing more. Um, but that's not Lord of the Rings. If you've read the books, you understand what I mean by that. The Lord of the Rings movies and the Lord of the Rings books are actually quite different from each other in several key elements. The skeletal structure is the same, but it is different. The Hobbit is actually a better example because the Hobbit is this, and the Hobbit in the movies is this. And I'm not making fun because I like the Hobbit movies. In fact, to be completely blunt, I like the Hobbit movies better than I like the Hobbit book. Yes, I said that. Yes, I went there. Because I didn't like the Hobbit book. And yeah, I said that too. Nevertheless, the point is, it was an interpretive work, okay? And I have said for years and years and years, I've made this statement, I've made the opinion clear, but on my show and in real life otherwise, that someone just sneezed, that interpretive work is something that I'm in favor of. Partially from a creative perspective. Partially from a creative perspective, because I do like the idea of taking an idea and playing with it. That's something I enjoy as a creator myself. It's part of the appeal of a fan fiction. Is not just self-insert or lots and lots of sex, but taking an existing setting and saying, well, what else could you do with it? Or how else could it be perceived? It's part of the whole appeal of the Elseworlds concept, which I've talked about so much. Again, Batman versus Superman. That clearly was not Batman as he is usually portrayed, and that's not Superman as he's usually portrayed. It is interpretations of the characters. But as Tigzar points out, one of the biggest counter-arguments to that is always, well, at that point, why not just make it a new work? Why not just make it a new name? Why not call it, The Journey of the Ring Bearer instead of The Hobbit? Why not make it its own IP? There are actually a lot of reasons for that, and I'm not going to go into that argument right now. But the point I'm trying to make is I'm usually okay with that kind of interpretive work. Okay? Now, let's rewind a moment here, okay? Yeah, the Warcraft movie is another good example of an interpretive work. Clearly different canon. I mean, Medivh is Garona's father, for God's sakes. Clearly an interpretive work. Although I did like it. I liked the Warcraft movie quite a bit. Yes, I am absolutely guilty of self-insert. I was in the Imperium. I use past tense because I died. Anyways, so, yeah, marketing branding is the biggest reason to not use a new IP. Yeah, Time Machine is actually a good example of a new interpretive work. That's actually a really good example that I actually forgot about. For those of you not aware, of course, the original Time Machine, a classic movie. I actually recommend it. It's one of the few, well, I shouldn't say few. It's one of the older movies that I still find enjoyable to this day. The new Time Machine movie, very, very different take on it, but I still liked it. It still felt like, a different interpretation. I actually... I kind of agree with you on that, Francis Dillinger. But anyways, I don't want to get too much into that. It should be obvious why I'm bringing this up now, by the way, in the discussion about the new Star Trek movie. What's one of the things I said when Into Darkness came out? I put a little video out. Some of you probably haven't even seen it. I put a short video. It wasn't even a full rumination of Into Darkness. And I made the point that Into Darkness was not a Star Trek movie. And the reason I made that point was because... in all of these interpretive works, in my opinion, there was still enough core of the character prior to then to say it was still, based on. It was still, it still was Lord of the Rings, to use an example. I have since kind of changed my opinion on that, which is why I'm bringing this up now. It's because, I made the argument, well, it's not Star Trek because it's not following what Star Trek means to me. And I've actually been discussing this a bit lately in real life, too. That's an opinion I am abandoning. I may not consider Star Trek Into Darkness to be a Star Trek movie because I think that it's basically samurai. I think that it's lacking several of the core strong elements that make Star Trek. So this leads me into what I actually want to talk about, and I'm going to tie these threads together. I swear. What is Star Trek? What is Star Trek to you? I'm not going to give you my answer. I have my answer. I have it written down even. But what is Star Trek to you? And I've heard so many different answers to this question. Lots of talking and awesome characters. Okay, Eruan says the crew with it. A mirror to the period in which it was made. I like that answer. Optimistic space exploration and awesome characters. I like that answer too. No safety features whatsoever. Very true. The characters and the journey. Yep, to seek out new life and to boldly go where no one has gone before. Any other answers before I continue? A vehicle to make commentary on the real world through a soft sci-fi setting. I'll agree with that. Star Trek is very soft sci-fi. The ideal future and cool ships. Characters and issues and topics. To boldly know what has gone before with awesome characters. You know what? I can't help but notice that a lot of you are saying something similar. A lot of you are saying, your own different interpretation of Star Trek, and that's great, and I love your guys' things. But I notice a lot of you are saying one thing repeatedly. Characters. For me, Star Trek has always been, across all of it, even including Enterprise, Star Trek has always been soft sci-fi with character focus and character-centric storytelling. That's what Star Trek is to me. And I like that, of course. I mean, obviously I eat character stuff up for breakfast and lunch and dinner. Yes, that's the one I meant, Eldrith. And yeah, I agree with the Shattered Moon comment. So yeah, I really like that concept of Star Trek. And, I love your guys' answers, too. So what Star Trek was for me was always about the characters. And that's one of the reasons why I argued that Into Darkness was not a Star Trek film. But that's not the relevant point here. I'm going to tell the past me to basically shut up. Because past me is being too limited and narrow-minded in his focus. Current me is looking back and saying, you know what? If you're going to interpret it in a different way, embrace it. Try something new and try something different, okay? Now, the reason I bring that up for this film is because half of this film is what I would define as a Star Trek film. And half of this film is something I would define very much as not a Star Trek film. But whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's the thing that really needs to be discussed, I feel. That's the thing that really needs to be thought upon. The fact that you come out with a Star Trek film that doesn't feel like a Star Trek film. Right now, let me go ahead and share something. I've heard several people share this comment. I tend to agree with it. What is probably the one thing that is true from Star Trek 1 to Star Trek 6, across all 6 movies? Yeah, even 5. I wish there was less delay here. Maybe if I ever get that partnership, I'll have less delay. Who knows? Spock and Kirk. The Bond between the crew, valid, but that's also in the TNG movies. Especially First Contact. Heck, that was even an Insurrection. Kirk, Spock, Bones, valid. Well, I'll go ahead and give the answer I'm looking for. They were very character focused, yes, but all of Star Trek is that way. Well, most of Star Trek. The relevant point is there wasn't really a lot of action in those movies. There was a lot of energy, but energy is different than action, isn't it? Energy is a different thing. Nicholas Meyer knows how to pull a lot of tension into something that otherwise shouldn't be tense. He's very skilled at that as a director and as a writer, actually. So there's a lot of people mistake Wrath of Khan and Star Trek VI for action films, but really analyze them for a moment. They're not actually action films, and there's very little action in them. Now look at the TNG films. How much action is in Generations? How much action is in First Contact? How much action is in Insurrection? How much action is there in Nemesis? All of the TNG movies have a great deal more of an action movie focus rather than the absence thereof that the original six had. I'm not bashing the TNG movies, by the way. I want to make that clear. It is just a different focus they were going for. So then we get to the newer movies. Now, Star Trek 2009 was very, very much an action film, and so was Into Darkness. And in retrospect, I think it's probably one of the things that I didn't like most about both films. Not counting the writing, obviously, because the writers are the worst writers in the known universe. And so I'm still building up to this overall point. The overall point here is that Star Trek Beyond, or whatever the heck it's actually called, the new Star Trek, is two films in one. And I mean that sincerely. You can literally tell, if you're really analyzing the structure of dialogue, the scenes that were written by one person versus the scenes that were written by another. The dialogue style is so different in the character scenes versus the action scenes. This movie is literally a 1 through 6 style movie merged with a 7 through 10 style movie. This is not a joke. This is actually what you're looking at in Star Trek Beyond. And it's especially true because actually 2 people wrote this movie, Zed. How's that for funny? I didn't know that until after I made this determination, by the way. I knew Simon Pegg was involved, but I didn't know there was actually a second person involved. No joke, by the way. But space. So the action scenes are pretty badly written in terms of dialogue. There are actually some pretty competent action scenes. They are very action-y. And there are some pretty awesome moments in the action scenes. And I'll talk more about some of those specifics later. But, like, again, specifically, the dialogue of the action scenes was bad. Like, actively bad. But then you have the character scenes, which are amazing. As someone mentioned in chat just a bit ago, there's several really, really, really good character moments between Chekhov and Kirk, between Spock and McCoy, and between Scotty and... I can't remember her name, forgive me. And those character moments, pure character, like it's just scenes that service the characters. It's all about their development, it's all about their characterization, it's all about their interactions. There's great chemistry, there's smart, sharp dialogue, and there's smart overall presentation of the story. In other words, one thing they don't do often in this movie is exposition. They don't say... one of the things that always bothers me about movies is when there's this horrible thing happening in the background, and one of the characters has to say, there's this horrible thing happening in the background. You don't have to tell us that. We're not stupid. You can show us it. And the movie does this a lot. The movie, in many, many points, will show us something where it's like... oh, and at no point will a character flat out say, this is what's happening. They just leave it for you to interpret it, to imply it, to understand what's going on. There's very little exposition in terms of dialogue, and that's a good thing, because all that exposition is then put into the visual storytelling. And so there's lots and lots and lots of really good presentation, in addition to writing style, in addition to dialogue. And yeah, the pilot about his family is a great example of what I'm talking about. They never have to say that outright. One of the things I want to address really, really quick. Before the movie came out, one of the only things I heard about it, I actually managed to avoid most spoilers, was that everyone was all upset because Sulu was openly gay. I didn't realize that until, like, the final act of the movie. As I realized the person that was with the daughter was actually supposed to be Sulu's partner. Nope, that didn't even occur to me. But I'm not saying that as an insult. It was something that was so naturally flowed through the character that I was like, okay, I'm with that. And it never even occurred to me to question it. So I don't actually see why people made a big deal about that. It flowed very naturally from the character, and it had very little attention devoted to it. There's no point at which Sulu just walks up and says, "Hey, by the way!" He didn't do that. It was presented as if it was just natural. Um. Uh. So, hang on, let me check my notes. I want to make sure I finished making my point here. I talked about that. The next thing I want to talk about, though, again, bringing this point full circle, is this a Star Trek movie? For me, it is. But I think I've reached a point in my old age. I'm only 34. I've reached a point in my old age where I have to look at something and decide, does that matter? Does it matter if this is Star Trek? Now, it is definitely Star Trek for me. Very character-focused, very character-centric. But does it matter? If it is a good work, should that not be allowed to stand on its own 2 feet? If something is enjoyable, even if it completely diverges from the source material, should I not then still look at that and say, that's a good thing? Or should I rail against it and say, this isn't Star Trek, this isn't Lord of the Rings, this isn't Batman, this isn't Star Wars, this isn't Mega Man, whatever. As long as it's good, shouldn't that be the point that matters? So, that's the overall point I wanted to reach there. And this is actually me disagreeing with Past Me, like I said. So, Past Me, shut up. Now, I will go ahead and give a counter argument to my own point here. Does anyone remember Paper Mario Sticker Star? What was my biggest complaint about Paper Mario Sticker Star? I'll just tell it to you. It wasn't a Paper Mario game. Now, this is not a, vague, intangible, what Paper Mario means to me thing. Like, Star Trek can mean different things to different people. For those of you not aware, just to use the Star Trek example, there are people who don't like Deep Space Nine because they think it's not Star Trek, because it is not Star Trek to them. And that's a valid opinion. I'm with that. Paper Mario is a lot less debatable because it was a side-scroller platformer that had no RPG elements and no story to speak of. At that point, that's like making a new Mega Man game that stars a turnip that attacks dirt clods. There's absolutely nothing still present from the original work. That's not interpretive at that point. That is a completely new work wearing the skin of an old work. Some of the older Final Fantasies did this as well back in the 80s and 90s. There's been several other examples of this too, but I use Sticker Star as the example because it is so blatantly obvious that it is not a Paper Mario game. And I was upset about that. The reason I was upset was because I wanted to purchase a Paper Mario, not this side-scrolling platformer. If it had been sold to me as side-scroll, Mario whatever, Turnip Man, if it had been sold as a side-scroller or whatever, well, I probably wouldn't have bought it. But even if I had, I would have known what I was getting into it, right? So there is something about truth in advertising as well. This, like I said, this is the alternate perspective here. If something is considered not the thing that it's advertising itself to be, if this was not a Star Trek film, then is it indeed valid for me to say, well, I don't like this. I came here to see a Star Trek film, and I didn't see a Star Trek film. So that, I do think that is absolutely a valid perspective. And unfortunately, most of the reasons, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, why it is still billed as a Paper Mario, or a Star Trek film, or a Final Fantasy, or Mystic Quest, excuse me, is because they're trying to sell you on the branding. It's a marketing tactic. So I do understand being upset about that kind of a thing, as long as you don't go into raving or ranting or hatred or hate boying. As long as you don't go into any of those extremes, then I'm okay with that. As long as you have a legitimate grievance in saying, well, I went into this movie expecting a Star Trek film and it wasn't, and I was upset about that. Okay, I'm with that. But I do think that I still have a valid point on the other side of that of, well, I went into a Star Trek film expecting a Star Trek film, didn't get a Star Trek film, but I got a film I liked. Make sense? Okay, so now that I've finished making that point, I think that's all I wanted to talk about in the intro. Yes, I just finished talking about my intro stuff. 30 minutes. God, I talk too much. I kind of want to open the floor. I have some other stuff I want to bring up, but I want to ask you guys, this is supposed to be interactive. Do any of you have anything you feel needs to be discussed or talked about? Anything you want to ask other people's opinions on, that kind of a thing? Trying to make this a little bit more of the interactive side of the stream. We do not know if they're making a new Star Trek movie, Kemek. We know they're making a new Star Trek show, which we still know virtually nothing about, and I have absolutely no hopes for. But, yeah. I liked the movie, like I said. And I have my own points I want to talk about. Oh, I know, Erwin. I am so envious. I'll talk about that in a minute. The ending. So I'll give my opinion. Spirit of Memories, of course, asking Chad as well, what do you think of the ending? I liked the ending. I actually did legitimately cry for a brief moment at the ending. That's manly tears, of course. But no, seriously. When he pulls up the picture, I actually cried at that scene. That hit me. I'm not going to lie. The picture from Undiscovered Country. Excuse me. Interesting, Francis. Did anyone get accosted by stormtroopers? Yes, thousands of them. Millions, even. No. The destruction of the Enterprise. I kind of want you guys to answer this before I just start. But yeah, how did you guys feel about the destruction of the Enterprise? I also agree with GD Bats. We're getting a little bit too much summer blockbusters rather than, timeless classics, I'm sorry, I can go watch Wrath of Khan right now, and I'll enjoy it just as frickin' much as I did 25, I guess, years ago. When I actually would have been longer than that. A long time ago. It's still an amazing movie. It's still a classic. Star Trek 6, which is my actually personal favorite Star Trek movie. Yeah. And, yeah. Yeah, the first trailer was terrible. I'm just going to say that bluntly. However, and I pointed this out when I was discussing the trailer the first time. The first trailer, the people who make trailers have nothing to do with the people who make the movies. I don't know how many of you know that. I keep making that point because I want that information to be spread into the world. More people need to realize that trailers are made by this own little team of people who I've railed against because they have their own problems, who are under the studio, and then the people who make the movie are over here. So a trailer, ironically, doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the film. It's one of the reasons I've said, and I've made this point very firmly, and I still stand by this point, trailers are obsolete. We actually, I genuinely feel we shouldn't have trailers anymore. We have so many other different ways and methods to get information about a movie and to get knowledge about a movie and to determine whether or not we like a movie or not, that we should use those methods rather than these stupid trailers, which are usually terrible and or spoily. And the first Star Trek Beyond trailer is a great example of a terrible trailer. And yeah, they've blown up the Enterprise a lot. I'll talk about. That's one of the points I want to discuss, but I want to see more of your guys' thoughts first. No, I think making Kirk a Beastie Boys fan makes a lot of sense, actually. Also, really quick thing, I loved the fact that McCoy's like, is that classical music? Well, Yeah, that was great. Jayla was awesome. I agree. Jayla was absolutely awesome. Uh, Question for you: how many of you thought they were actually going to kill off Kirk in this movie? It would have fit so many things, narratively speaking, if you really think about it. Uh, mm, I guess I have no thoughts on that, Arrowin. Was the NX used? Yes. The NX was in it. It did not look exactly like the Enterprise NX. It was actually an interpreted NX, but it was still very, very clearly an NX model. It was not the NX-01. It was the Franklin. I'll just go ahead and get that out there. The city. I kind of want to sit on discussing the city. Um, I can't remember that. What was the name of the city? What was the name of the space station? Because I have like a whole discussion I want to say about that. I really do. Yes, Nintendo took until the 22nd century to. Yorktown. That was it. Thank you. The Yorktown. I need to blow my nose. Hang on a second. I would say this movie is head over shoulders superior to both the 2009 and Into Darkness. Absolutely. By a wide margin. I would probably, if I was just right now, having only seen the movie once, but if you ask me my gut reaction, there's 6, 2, 8, 4. That hasn't changed in years. After that, it gets trickier. But in all honesty, I'm actually tempted to put Beyond next in that list. Whether that's high praise or low praise, that's up to you. But, yeah. Yeah, that was Cause and Effect. Great product. Great episode, by the way. Yeah, I want to rewatch it, too. I'm buying the hell out of the Blu-ray of this movie when it comes out. I'm biting my tongue. There's so much I want to discuss, but I want to get more from you guys before I just start launching into my own stuff. I would consider that high praise. Yes, absolutely. God, that was such a good episode. Cause and Effect. Sorry, it's among my favorite TNG. It's like in the top 20, 10, something like that, of TNG movies for me. I agree. The posters were actually really good. There was this full-sized, 12-foot tall poster, 8 foot wide, of Star Trek Beyond when we went to theaters. Absolutely beautiful looking. Um, I've actually answered that question many times. The one, because a quarterly return is more important than a long-term profit. Remember, we live in the era of quarterly returns. We have for many years, since the 90s, actually. Arguably before that, since the 70s, but I don't want to get into that discussion right now. Yes and no, Little Billy. The swarm ships, for me, certainly were extremely effective weapons, but this is Starfleet we're talking about here. All Starfleet has ever needed, historically speaking, is a push to really develop their military technology. Borg! Dominion! Excuse me. So, um, yeah, what Dakota says is also true. Although I do think the quarterly returns focus thing is a monumental problem and responsible for most of what's wrong in society today, and I mean that sincerely. Um, but then again, it is an absolutely terrifying topic if you really start digging into it when you understand how much of society is being wrecked on purpose because of quarterly returns. But anyways, So yeah, the swarm ships. First of all, brilliant design. The scene with the tidal wave, that gave me legit chills. I was actually just like in my chair. You know, actually, I was more like this because I'm just like, just holy crap. And yeah, I firmly believe that they could have done some really serious damage to Starfleet. However, I also firmly believe that Starfleet would have been able to determine a counter attack to them. By the way, I just want to say I am very impressed that they didn't use Technobabble to defeat the Swarm. Because they didn't, and I'll explain why when I get to that topic. The race that built the technology on the planet, well, it's obviously the Borg. No, seriously though, legit. The race that built the technology is not the Borg, but it reminds me very, very much of the Vulcan superweapon in TNG. I don't remember the name of the two-parter, but that was actually my very first thought. Was this was a more advanced, more wide-scale biological weapon in the similar manner to that kind of weapon. Excuse me. See you around, Samurai. And yeah, I have this weird feeling that they were intended to be one of the many races we've already encountered in Star Trek mythos that actually develop it. As a quick aside, I have to say, oh, Erwan actually just asked me about it. I didn't actually like the new warp animation. Sorry. It's probably one of the only things I didn't like visual style wise. I mean, the visual effects team and the visual designers and art directors on this movie get all the praise. Really, 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 really great stuff. But I really did not like the new warp animation. Just my opinion, just my preference. It just, I mean, I even get where they're going with it. Like, as I'm watching it, there's that extended scene where you show it for, like, I think, like 9 seconds of showing it, which doesn't sound like a long time, but when it's 9 seconds of just warp, you get a good chance to really analyze it. And I'm looking at it like, okay, I get where they're going with this, you know, the warp bubble creating the field and moving through space, blah, 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 blah. But at the same time, it just looked weird to me. It looked a little bit too liquid. And it's obvious they were going for that. But, again, yeah, the visual effects team, I am genuinely envious of their artistic direction design. Brilliant, brilliant stuff. Hey, Omni. Mining gear and its ability to destroy Starfleet. Well, you see, no. One thing I actually really like is the fact that they actually managed to tie in Leonard Nimoy's death and make it an actual character point. That they didn't just, like, it's clear that they didn't just do that to honor Leonard Nimoy. They did that and then made it part of Spock's character growth in honor to Leonard Nimoy. Again, good writing, smart writing. The character stuff was very, very smartly written, and that's another example of that. Yes, I did Spirit of Memory. Although, I will say one thing. This is an extremely minor complaint, but all 3 of the Abrams Star Trek movies have the same problem. They make space seem small. Remember, the NX had no warp drive. And yet they managed to go from a planet to another planet through a nebula. Think about this just a moment. You want another example of this? Well, I could point out the fact that they beamed from Earth to Kronos back and Into Darkness, or the fact that it took them like a couple of minutes to get from Earth to Kronos and then back to Earth. How about the fact that they had this space battle in space and then somehow they fell into the gravitational wake of Earth in Into Darkness? Now, granted, Into Darkness was written by a monkey who was, and I've said this many times, it was the worst writer I've ever seen. I've literally used those writers as textbook examples of bad writing. Nevertheless, all 3 Star Trek movies do legitimately have a degree of feeling of space being small. And this movie got it across. It did some good stuff with this. But nevertheless, it's just something that was just kind of like, what? Huh? Yeah, that's true, Kemek. That's true. So they go from Kronos, and they're warping, and then, oh, there's the Vengeance. But then they're warping, and then, oh, well, there's the moon. And then there's Earth. Kronos. Now, I really hate to geek out about this, Kemek, but at the same time, you just geeked out on me, so I think it's fair for me to geek back. Have you seen the star charts of Star Trek? Because I have many times. I can tell you exactly where Kronos is. Kronos is way the hell over here. Like in a galactic sense. Earth is way up here. I know this isn't getting across the picture, so let me make you a point. Sorry, wrong direction. This is the curvature of the galaxy. Okay? And so over here is Kronos, and up here is Earth. Anyways, I'm done nitpicking. Let me look at my notes. I have a few other things I wanted to talk about here. Right, the directing. So, the directing of this movie was both good and bad. I very, very felt. I agree with you, Kemek. That's my point. It's the distance thing. That's what I'm talking about, dude. You see, most Star Trek things, when they have that distance, they say, go to warp. Okay, I'm going to my quarters, and they'll have a scene that's a character scene to help to flesh out characters or whatever, and that's like, okay, we'll do this, and then talk about this, and and there's like a time jump or a captain's log establishing the fact that time has passed, and then it'll go that as opposed to, all right, let's go, and then it's here. But this is actually something that's interesting because the director of both 2009 and Into Darkness. I was Erwan. Absolutely. Sorry. I saw your question. I just didn't make it. Gotcha, Kemek. We're cool. One of the things that all three movies have done is Abrams in the first two movies, he cheated. He did directorial cheating. Now, if you don't understand what I mean by that, he would do things that aren't literal. He would present you something that's supposed to be representative of something rather than literally be something. To give you a direct, literal example of what I'm talking about, there's a scene in... I actually can't remember if it's Into Darkness or 2009. One of them, where he hands command over and he's going down to the bay to leave. And as he's leaving... the character is Sulu, I'm pretty sure, starts giving the speech of here's what we're doing. While Sulu is still giving the speech, he's like a few seconds into his speech, we see Kirk and the away party already down, already in uniform, already leaving. That's what I mean by cheating. That can't literally happen. Okay? That's not how that works. What that is doing is trying to cheat by basically squeezing lots of events into a small period. So rather than presenting those events as if they actually happened, they present like layers from a artistic perspective of similar events in a similar time frame going at the same time. Does that make sense? I'm probably explaining this terribly. This movie does that kind of cheating too, even though it's a different director. And there's quite a few scenes which were very obviously, clearly not literal. That's not literally what's happening. This is the cheating thing. Other than that particular issue, one of the things that I found most interesting was the director of this movie kept trying to try new things. Like, did you notice that? He was trying new techniques, new ideas. He did a lot of Yeah, exactly, Takoda. Very good way to put that. He liked to do a lot of non-standard presentations of perspectives, a lot of non-standard cuts, a lot of non-standard angles, and motion of the camera, lighting, all the directing felt like he was experimenting. And for the most part, I was on board with that. I actually liked the vast majority of the experimentation and the unique style it gave to the film. However, There are several scenes, most notably when they're in the camp trying to rescue the crew, that was freaking terrible. Because of shaky cam and because of jump cuts. I hate shaky cam and I hate jump cuts. I understand why jump cuts exist. I do, from a creative perspective. Doesn't make me like it anymore. It doesn't make me enjoy it anymore. It makes me look at it and go, I have no idea what the hell's going on. For those of you who don't know what I mean by jump cuts, like you see usually on average about half a second to a second of a particular, action. This, and then the camera shifts over here, and then the camera shifts over here, and then the camera shifts over here, and then the camera shifts over here. There's no one cut. There's no one take. It's all jump, 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 jump. And it's horrible. And I'm sick of it. I'm freaking sick of it. One of the reasons, I hate to bring Star Wars into this, but one of the things I really liked about the way Abrams approached several scenes in Force Awakens was he actually went away from jump cuts for a few scenes. Obviously, he still did jump cuts. But there's a few scenes where the camera just did this. All the way over here. And then all the way back. One smooth cut. And I tend to prefer that personally. Not just because it appeals to me more aesthetically, but because it makes it much, much easier for me to understand what the hell's going on. And I admit the movie snob in me, because I do have a little bit of a movie snob in me, also prefers that because it takes more skill to pull off. The whole reason jump cuts exist is because they're easier to do. Yes, Kemek, that's the exact scene I was just referencing. Jump cuts are much, much easier to make. If you screw up on a jump cut, you go right back and you redo it. It was like 2 seconds. Whoop-de-crap. Yeah. Okay. And you could do like 3 or 4 takes of a 2-second cut and then just pick whichever one works best, right? If you have a cut that's like 30 seconds long or a minute long or 5 minutes long, then you have to do the whole thing over again if anything goes wrong. If the lighting doesn't work, if a device goes off wrong, if someone flubs a line, if someone trips, if there's some noise off thing, it is harder to get right. But in my opinion, it looks much, much better when you get it right. So that was my problem with the jump cuts. But other than the jump cuts thing, and other than the shaky cam, the director was frickin' amazing. I really, really liked how he played with new ideas with this one. Do I think they'll keep Jayla? Honestly, I'm not sure this timeline's going to go forward at all. But no, I don't think they will. Star Trek movies have a pretty bad tendency to not keep secondary characters going forward. And I agree, if they are smart, they will not replace Chekhov. I agree with that sentence. I have a note here called art design. I've kind of already talked about this. Art design, holy crap. The art directors, the visual effects directors, wow. Just absolutely wow. But I want to say something about that. One of the complaints I have heard is that Star Trek is too advanced. Starfleet is too advanced for the point in history they're at. Historically speaking, these people are just a little bit before the motion picture in timeline-wise, right? So to give you a little bit of perspective on where they are at relative to the original timeline, that's how far they've gotten. And they are clearly and demonstrably much, much, much more advanced. Yeah, I agree, Kemek, absolutely. And yes, Frozen, absolutely. So that's how they're much, much more advanced. But looking at it, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. And, the world builder in me looks at this like, well, given how many things have changed, given the events of 2009, absolutely given the events of Into Darkness, and the further push into the technology that they've been pushing. Basically, I think that they've had a bit of a jump start, technologically speaking, in the Abrams timeline, or the Kelvin timeline, excuse me. And therefore, it makes sense to me that they are literally at about TNG level of advancement 70 years early. Because 70 years isn't a huge gap, relatively speaking, and is something I could understand. Now, if they're as advanced as, say, like, I don't know, the future Voyager stuff, that would be like, whoa. But, yeah. Actually, it wouldn't surprise me at all, Chemic, if that is something that did happen. Obviously, that's just the world builder in me thinking of how to put the pieces together. But nowhere is this more important and more relevant than in the Yorktown, which is insanely advanced, even by Star Trek standards. That is very, very impressive what they pulled off there. So I want to go ahead and get fire off rapid fire. My first few thoughts when I saw the Yorktown. First couple of thoughts were, I wish I was creative enough to come up with something like that. And then my sister whacked me because she says I am creative to come up with stuff like that. But seriously, that is such an awesome idea. Again, no exposition. They don't just say, this is how this place works, and this is how this thing is, and how this thing is. They just show you it. They just show you it. Lots of great shots of the place, lots of different perspective shots, and you get a feel for how the place actually works. And I found that, so my second thought was thinking, how do I make this place work? How do I actually make this place functional so I can add it to the Empire? Because it's such a cool idea. The funny thing is the way they presented it was actually surprisingly logical. And yeah, I had the Citadel vibe as well. Although, to be completely honest, I didn't have the Citadel vibe first. I actually had the Light Temple first. Parallel. Of course, you guys have no idea what the Light Temple looks like because it's only up here in my head, but it is something I did design for the Primus setting. It's just planet-bound instead of in space. But anyways, yeah, then the second thought I had was, it looks a lot like the Citadel too. The rings, the cities on both sides of it, the way they make the gravity work, the way that they have the water, which is being kept in place, not by force fields, but just by gravitational eddies. The giant pathways where the ships go through, and the fact that it's got an artificial atmosphere so that from the outside you see the bubble, but from within you actually see the sky, and just I could gush about the Yorktown. It was probably one of the single most impressive elements of the entire movie for me, just from a purely world-building perspective. And again, insanely advanced, although once again makes sense to me. This is a Federation that didn't have the Klingon War. You noticed that, right? At this point in history, Starfleet should have had the Klingon War. The second Klingon War, but they didn't. So that's another big change that in the timeline. But anyways, this is a Starfleet that is unified. That's actually one of the big themes of the movie, is unity. Unified in a way that Starfleet shouldn't have been until the TNG era. And it makes sense to me personally, again, world builder here, that a unified Starfleet, a unified Federation, would be able to build something like that. That being said, there's one line, speaking about this unity thing, that actually made me audibly snort, and my sister looked at me weird. I forget who says it, but someone says, Starfleet is not a military organization. And I was like, just first thing I responded to was just, what? I have, of course, been one of those people who have thought for years that Starfleet is a military organization, but I know that's a big topic of derision. I don't want to get into that. But the fact that they so blatantly said that just made me go, okay, sure. Yeah. Scotty says it? Okay. Scotty's the one who says it. Yeah, I liked that too, Roaring. She did a great job as the Commodore too, I think. Keela Salai, Kirk. What? I was going somewhere else with the Yorktown too. How would they have torpedoes? Yes, of course, scientific exploration. Oh, speaking of which, I loved the intro. No, I really did. The intro did something that Star Trek rarely does. It really analyzed how cultural differences can completely get in the way of diplomacy. Because that's what the intro was. I mean, obviously it was there for comedic effect. But, offering this artifact to you and this whole... do they not want it anymore? Is it trash? Maybe they stole it. That is cultural differences being presented. That is a completely different mindset from a socially different alien species being presented something from a different perspective, and the two clashing. And I really liked that. I really liked that demonstration of part of the job, part of Starfleet and the Federation's job. And it's something that is very, very, very difficult to overcome. And I like that they failed. I know that sounds weird, but I like the fact that they failed at creating this, that assisting in this diplomatic peace party and all, blah, 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 blah. Um, yeah, exactly, Erwan. Very, very violently different cultures, and I loved that. Oh, it was absolutely silly, but it very much added to the Unity theme, and of course the artifact was relevant. Um, Good stuff there. I'm getting off topic now. Hang on, let me check my notes. I made my notes for a reason. Already talked about the character piece versus the Ash conflict. So I want to talk about one complaint about the movie. Okay, originally I was going to get across my complaints at the beginning. I have 1, 2, 3, like 5 or so complaints here. So you ready for this? Complaints. Yeah, I know, right, Darkrai? Complaints about the movie. First of all, the destruction of the Enterprise felt incredibly cheap. I've said this for many, many, many years. The Enterprise is just as much of a character on the show, on the movies, whatever, as the actual characters are, as the actors are. I have made that argument for a long time. Just like the Millennium Falcon is a character in Star Wars, right? So if you're going to do something like, and what have I said so many times in my show and in real life, of course, if you're going to kill a character, make it mean something. Don't kill off Tom Paris and then have him bring him back to life for no reason. Let's actually analyze how many times the Enterprise has been destroyed for real. I'm not talking about alternate dimensions. I'm not talking about time skips or things being undone, because then we'd have to count like 6 more times for cause and effect. So we had Star Trek 3, big moment, or at least it should have been. It wasn't, but it should have been a big moment. We have Star Trek 7. And then we have Star Trek Beyond. This is it. The destruction of the Enterprise C is implied, and the destruction of the... we have no idea what happened with the B. But anyways, so yeah, these 3. That's good, Django. These are the 3 times the Enterprise has been destroyed. In Star Trek 3, it didn't have the impact it should have. I've actually mentioned that in my rumination of Star Trek 3. In Star Trek 7, it really, really didn't have the impact it should have. And in Star Trek Beyond, it really, really, really didn't have the impact it should have. Because, yeah. And that's the problem. All 3 major times, in a movie, no less, that the Enterprise has actually been destroyed, for real, it hasn't meant anything. But it should. You know? It meant exactly as much as Kirk dying back in Into Darkness meant, which was basically nothing. It had an impact on Spock as a character, and then they moved on. So that's one of my big complaints. Now, there were a couple of good things in there, in the destruction of the Enterprise scene. First of all, the way the Swarm destroyed the Enterprise was actually quite smart. And I liked that. I did actually enjoy the way that they did that. And I liked how it once again, it did have some purpose, because it showcased that Unity thing, and it pretty brilliantly actually set up the second act of the movie. But that's actually kind of the problem. It's like in the intro of the movie, the Enterprise gets blown up. And I do mean blown up, just destroyed. The Enterprise is gone. Actually, no, I didn't literally, but I'll get to that in a minute. So, but it served to chop up the cast, which I'll talk about later because that's a positive, and it served to showcase that unity thing because of the way the crew interacted with and functioned with each other, tried to get things working, tried to help each other out. There were a lot of good things with the boarding actions. There was a lot of good action scenes. As I said before, the action stuff was actually good, not particularly well written, but still good. It was still a good action flick, and a lot of that was just action stuff. And they did some creative stuff with the directing, as I've mentioned before, and they killed it properly, as I mentioned. But it felt, the whole thing felt just like, okay, the Enterprise is destroyed. That's, okay. you know, whatever. Um, the, this saucer separation thing was interesting. Yeah, I like the new evacuation scene, absolutely. I liked the way that the Kirk was the last person to leave the ship. Kudos for that. Never called it out, by the way. They didn't have to say a captain goes down with a ship. They didn't have to say I should be the one to man the bridge until the end. They never said it. Again, they do this a lot in this movie. They don't say it. They just show it. He was the last one off the ship, and the visual shot of him, just you see his reflection there as the Enterprise skips away. Very creative directing, very creative camera stuff. But of course, I still just think destroying the Enterprise was just kind of a what. So I've mentioned, yeah, exactly, Erwan. I mentioned that a lot of the writing, in terms of both dialogue and the construction, was very smart. But there's one really, really blatant negative in the writing. If you have a character that you have a mystery around, what is the, I would argue, the second thing you should do writing-wise if you have a mystery surrounding a character? I'll go and just tell you. What you should not do is say, there's a mystery about this character. You should not have a character flat out say, in character, there's more to you than it seems. You should not have them say, there's something else about you. You should not have them say, what are you actually after? Don't flat out, blatantly, bluntly say, this guy's got a secret, because that just ruins it. Ignoring the fact that I guessed the big secret of Krall pretty early, actually. I didn't really mean to. It just was like, oh, he's ex-Starfleet. Oh, he's not. Okay. Oh, no, he was. But they were just so, like, I felt like they had giant neon signs pointing to Krall saying, hey, there's a big twist! There's a twist! There's a twist! And then the twist happened, and because they had, well, at least possibly because they had demonstrated and broadcasted it so often and so blatantly, I was just completely underwhelmed by the twist. It's like, oh, okay, he's human. And he's ex-Starfleet. Really, Darkrai? I didn't actually see that. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it would be so easy for them to just kind of eject the scenes where characters, again, in character, are like, there's a twist! There's something about this guy. What about you? You know, it was so blatant that it pulled me out of it. And then when it was like, oh, he used to be Starfleet, I'm like, okay, and? By the way, as a fun little anecdote, I caught it the first time. To explain what I mean by that, there's a scene where they start a log on the Franklin, and then they just walk away from it, but the camera pans onto it for a second, and you can see Idris Elba on the log. And I was like, oh, okay. And by this point, I'd already kind of guessed it, but it's like, okay, that would have been clever, because you have to really be paying attention to catch that. And then later on, after the tons and tons and tons of broadcasting, they go back to the log and replay it like 50 times before Idris Elba turns around and is like, hey. Yeah, that the second time where they just hammered it into the audience, it was like the exact opposite writing style of the rest of the movie. So much of the movie leaves the pieces there for you to pick up and doesn't push it into your face. That scene was like, the movie was just like, here, look at this, you know? It was way, way too obvious and way, way too blatant. So that reminds me of my next big complaint. The villain. Which is funny because Spirit just said that. So, the villain, right? Krall. let me go ahead and say that I'm actually a big fan of Idris Elba. Alba? Alba? Shoot, I sound like I can't think of his name. I am. I'm a fan of his. I thought he would have been a great Batman. I think he would make a great Bond. But, yeah, pretty much Rory. But I feel like he was mostly wasted in this role. Partially for two big reasons. I feel like Kroll failed for two really big reasons. Reason number one, I already just mentioned. The big twist, which is not really that big of a twist, and frankly not actually that interesting of a twist. But reason number two, and this is the very, 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 very biggest problem with Kroll as a character, in my opinion. His motivation is stupid. No, really. His motivation is stupid. His whole motive, his modus operandi, is not really even revenge. He is a soldier who is angry that his people have demilitarized, and so he's going to kill them all. What? And even when he's flat out confronted about this, he can give no logical reaction or response to it. In fact, his motives were so nonsensical that I actually felt the movie was leaning itself towards the idea of him being redeemed in the end, in that final confrontation with Kirk in the air vent. Of course, that's not what happened. Yeah, obviously, he is, even in his logs where he's the human, when he's giving his captain, his captain's log, he's clearly mentally unstable and unbound. So yeah, he's absolutely crazy. I get that. But what? It completely pulled me out of the character. There's no sympathy for the character. There's no fear of the character. I had no emotion. It made no impact on me. And as Luxie points out, it's a fairly generic motivation. If he wanted to militarize Star Trek, I could see that. I understand why they wouldn't want to do that, because that was the plot of the last villain, if you remember, in Into Darkness. So maybe that was like the original idea, and then they ejected that because that was the previous plot, because that would make a little more sense. Maybe he wants to make a new Starfleet. That would make a little more sense. Maybe he wants to go after the enemies of Starfleet, regardless of the Federation idiots. You know, I could think of like 5 other things off the top of my head that would make a little bit more sense than, I'm gonna go kill you guys because. And Lord knows that I am someone that understands using a crazy villain. I tend to like well-done crazy villains, actually. But this guy really just, yeah, it felt very plot holy. It felt very token. It felt very uninteresting. It really did. Yes, I do, Little Billy. Absolutely. I feel like I said, there's just so many different things they could have done to make this make more sense. But instead, he just wants to kill everyone because. Yeah, seriously, Dakota. What of my own military state? He practically has made his own military state. He has his own little thing with his crew there. It's just... And they even hint that there's some kind of new, this no strength through conflict thing, which is what I thought they were going with. So maybe, a motivation of him trying to bring conflict to Starfleet, to force them into survival of the fittest. And yet he doesn't do that. He just wants to kill them all. You see my problem with this? It's just, it's like inches in several different directions from something that would make sense, but it never bothered to actually go there. Instead, he's just a crazy guy with no real fleshing out of the whys or the wherefores, and he wants to kill everyone because they needed a villain. And the final reason, and this was already mentioned in chat, that I found this to be discouraging, is because it's Idris Elba. God, I'm saying his name so wrong. It's Cool Guy. And he's a good actor, and I felt like it was misusing him. It was misusing him as an actor, and it was misusing Kroll as a character. Actually, he did have a super weapon frozen. So, yeah. I like that idea, Roaring. We need to have some whales in there, though. Whales are awesome. I think they should have done more to flesh him out. To make his crew, why his crew is loyal, why they're all following him, how they got other people down there. That reminds me of my next complaint, by the way. Let's go and just move straight into this. As much as there's a lot of very smart writing in this movie, and I've emphasized that many, many times, some of the more actiony elements of the story and some of the actual points of the story overall are pretty plot holy. A lot of things happen because of the plot, if you know what I mean by that. They don't happen because they make sense. They don't happen because it's logical. They don't happen because it's, it helps to emphasize story or themes or characterization. They happen because we need to get to the next point. Therefore, we need to get to the next point. And it's bad writing. There's a lot of elements, and I was keeping track at first. I stopped after a bit, of things that would happen because plot. And the entirety of Idris Elba feels like, the entirety of Crawl, I should say, feels like because plot to me. Now, Erwan has pointed out some ways we could make it make sense. And there are ways you could make it make sense, but they never did, and that's my point. Crawl was because plot. They could have made him make sense. They could have added him to the theme of Unity. They could have added him to the theme of the setting. They could have added him to the themes of the characters. They didn't. He was there because plot. Just like a lot of other things were. They needed a thread. Which is a damn shame, because there's so much potential there. As we've just been spitballing, and people in chat and I both have come up with tons and tons of options of what they could have done with him, rather than just... So, shrug, I guess. Moving on. What's my next complaint? Destruction of the Enterprise was dumb. Okay, so 2 more complaints. Okay, you ready? There we go. 2 more complaints, okay? Then I'm done with complaints. We'll get back to positives. So, the construction scene at the end of the new Enterprise. I didn't like that. I know. You're going to be upset at me for this, but let me explain what I mean by that. This is a Starfleet that made the Yorktown. Give us a new ship. Give us the Excelsior. Give us the Commodore. This is an extremely advanced... See, around one. This is an extremely advanced Starfleet. Federation, excuse me. I use the terms interchangeably. I shouldn't. They're different organizations. There should have been a new ship, is what I'm trying to say. Rather than just making the exact same Enterprise with the exact same style and the exact same everything, I was just... I was disinterested in it. At first, I was, inclined towards it. Because at first, I thought they were going to go with the Constitution A. The one from the movies. Like they did in 4, for example. That would have been cool. I would have actually liked that if they move forward. That's actually not what I first thought, though. Me and both of my friends who I went with actually thought it was going to be the Excelsior. We actually thought it was going to be the Excelsior, because they mentioned it very, 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 very briefly in the beginning of the movie. They mentioned the brand new ship, and that's what the future is, and blah, blah. You remember that? So we're like, awesome. We're gonna get the Excelsior as the final, as the send-off for the future. And I thought that would have been much more fitting the theme of the movie and fitting the idea of them moving forward. You know what I mean? Instead, it's the frickin' Constitution. Not the Constitution A, the Constitution. And at that point, I felt like it was, to be completely blunt, pointless. In fact, it reminded me of Star Trek V, actually, where Star Trek V basically doesn't actually make sense in relation to Star Trek 4 and 6 with the Enterprise A. So, I've talked about that. I don't want to get back into that. So, yeah. And yeah, I would have loved to see what a JJ Universe... again, absolute tons of props to the art design team. I would have loved to see what they did of their take on an Excelsior class. And remember, there was an Excelsior class named Enterprise. Remember that? It's the Enterprise B. But I know that's a very minor complaint, but after everything the movie went through, I was just on a high. I was like, yes, I was really loving the movie. And then they start building the new ship, and it's such a framework that you can't tell what it is at first. And I'm like, dude, it's going to be the Excelsior, or it's going to be the Enterprise A. No, it's the same thing. It's just after all that positivity, it felt like deflating, and that's why I disliked it so much. Especially after that amazing scene with the picture, which, like I said, made me cry. So, whatever. Final complaint. This isn't really a complaint per se, but a concern. This movie is not significant. This is the big Star Trek anniversary. I forget which year. Doesn't matter. 40th? I don't know. 50th? 80th? 170th? Something like that. It's big Star Trek anniversary, and Star Trek has, and I've said this many times, basically been dying for a while. And ever since Nemesis, Star Trek has just been kind of not. Star Trek Online has been continuing the Star Trek franchise more than anything else has. Now, we do have a new show coming out next year, which will probably suck. And we know nothing about still, other than the fact that it's going to be on an exclusive CBS channel. Hashtag screw CBS. Can I get a hashtag screw CBS, please? Like 50 of them? 100? 1,000? Something like that. But the point is, this movie should have been amazing. This movie should have been significant. Just like Star Trek VI was. Star Trek VI, if you'll remember, was the last big anniversary of Star Trek. In fact, the only reason Star Trek VI got made was because it was the big anniversary. You remember that? I do. I remember seeing that sucker in the theaters. I remember they had this whole build-up, and there were tons of interviews with the cast and the director and the writers, and there was tons and tons of build-up to Star Trek VI because it was the big movie coming out for the anniversary, and then Star Trek VI, bam, knocked it out of the park, right? So Star Trek VI was the perfect cap to the anniversary. Yep, that's right, 25th anniversary. God, that's been a while. That just feels weird. I remember Star Trek VI coming out very distinctly. I remember standing in line. And then this movie, 50th anniversary. 50th, right? I have that right? And it's a good movie. But there's been no real build-up, no real hype, no real analysis, no real... here's the Star Trek, and here's where we're going with this and all that. It's just, here's a movie. Good movie. And yeah, that's another thing. A lot of people tend to forget Unification 1 and 2 on TNG were tying in to Star Trek 6. TNG was also riding high at the 25th anniversary. And the 25th anniversary and the success of Star Trek 6 helped propel TNG all the way to the point where it would basically get to the end of the 7th season. And that's my final complaint, if you can even call it a complaint. This should have been a BAM movie. It was a good movie. I intend to buy this movie. I really enjoyed this movie. But it was not a significant movie. And that is the difference. Yeah, we were making another Star Trek film rather than we were making the 50th anniversary Star Trek film. That's a good way to put that, G.D. Batts. I've actually never believed that, Dark Ray. So let's talk about some more positive things, shall we? Let me check my list here. Okay, so I mentioned the second act thing. One thing I felt they did very, 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 very well. Nerdman, I loved it. It just wasn't significant. You missed me gushing about the movie for the last, hour, okay? I do not know Great Baltic. But we'll see. Yeah, the Yorktown is the 50th anniversary. The second act was brilliant. What they did was they split up the crew. I mentioned that was one of the good things. Yes, I know, Nerdman. That's why I told you that for the last hour I've been gushing about the film. That's why I told you that, because I know you just got here. The second act was brilliant. They split up the crew, which was a great idea. It showed a lot of the thematic significance of that and how that ties into the whole Unity theme. But most importantly, it made a lot of really tight personal focused character scenes. Yeah, exactly. It gave quality time to what I love about Star Trek, characters. The scenes between Spock and McCoy were perfect. Not good, not great, not amazing. Perfect. I was blown away by those scenes. Just wow. The dynamic between the two, the banter, the obvious chemistry, the incredible respect that was on display. They used it for amusement, or not amusement. Excuse me. No, that's right. They used it for amusement. They used it for character development. They used it for thematic development. There's this amazing, amazing scene where Spock actually starts to tell McCoy. Or I forget how it works, but basically, he's saying, this is how you're amazing, and despite our repartee, I've always had a tremendous respect and friendship for you. And the other one says, you don't have to say it. I loved that. And Spock opening up to McCoy, talking about how Leonard Nimoy died, talking about how he was going to abandon the project. He was going to try and help New Vulcan. He was going to try and move forward. Blah blah blah. All that. The fact that he was opening it up in an incredibly personal way, which is something Spock basically only does to like 3 people, to McCoy. God, that was good. And then we go over, and then we have Chekhov and Kirk. Now they didn't have as much interactions because it was also about the traitor, and yet all the interactions between those two were gold. Every single thing between the two of them, and the way that you notice how Chekhov actually, it correctly interpreted Kirk's misdirection several times. And I like that because, again, it's saying without saying how much of a team this crew is, how much they rely on each other, how much they work together, how well they work together. The two of them just gelled. Very little necessity for discussion, very little necessity for explaining their plans for each other. They just kind of went in a direction, and the other one followed, and it worked. And then, of course, Scotty with, I've already forgotten her name, Jayla, I want to say. Simon Pegg nailed it. I mean, Simon Pegg's good in general, but he absolutely... This is probably the first movie where I really, really, really feel like he nailed the Scotty. He nailed Scotty, and he did a great job of that. And his interactions with Jayla were awesome. And you also learned a lot more about Scotty in the way he presented himself to effectively this completely alien person. And I have, again, nothing but praise for that. Yeah, Nerdman. And yeah, Kirk was very smart in this one. I liked that. I've actually even defended Kirk being a brat in 2009, as much as I didn't like it, as much as I wanted to punch his face in. But this is clearly... They actually bothered to have the 3-year gap between the last movie and this one. A 3-year plus, actually, gap between the last year and this year. That's last movie and this movie. And it allowed the writers to write him as if he now had seasoning. He has experience. He has become weathered. He's still the same kind of sardonic person in there, but at the same time, he now has a little more authority behind him. He's a little, and like was mentioned by Darkstar, he's much smarter in his presentation. It clearly shows at several points that Kirk is actually quite cunning, quite intelligent, and they actually show Kirk being intelligent rather than just like in a couple of the previous films where they just constantly tell us how Kirk is amazing and don't really show that all that often on screen. I liked the hologram thing. I also had the amusing little thought of, yeah, it makes sense given the fact that the technology is about 70 years ahead, that holograms would be a thing already. But I liked how they presented it. I would say he's a little more like Kirk from the original series, to be completely honest. Like, that's the point at which he'd reached in terms of his presentation. He wasn't at the Kirk of the movies, which was the old Kirk, who, had a completely different character arc. But I digress. I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, and the other point was, of course, Uhura. Now I give tons and tons of praise to the second act, but Uhura is probably one of the weak links in there, and that's a shame because I suddenly can't think of the actress's name. The woman who plays Uhura was one of my favorite parts of both 2009 and Into Darkness. She's a great actress, and she completely knocked Uhura out of the park in both of those movies. But in this movie, I feel like she was extremely underutilized. Maybe that's because she had such a big role in the previous two films. But a lot of her scenes were basically like she had Zeldana. Thank you, Zoe Zeldana. There was some good stuff with her. There was some good stuff. Her interaction with Spock at the beginning was good. Her saving Kirk was good. And then it kind of nosedived. And this dovetails with what I was talking about earlier with the overly obvious foreshadowing of Krall's true nature and the fact that they're like, twist, twist. And Uhura, unfortunately, had to be the character carrying around the giant neon sign saying there's a twist coming up. And I feel that was a bit of a shame. It's the only part of the second act I didn't like. I agree with Darkstar, by the way. The weight of his father's death on his birthday and the very, very intimate scene. When I was watching this movie, like I said, I expected to not like it. And I was still in that mindset up until the scene. We're rewinding a bit. We're back into the first act. I was in the mindset of I'm not going to like this movie right up until I saw the scene between McCoy and Kirk. I mean, the earlier scene just made me laugh, with the cultural differences. But when I saw McCoy and Kirk having that quiet, somber, all character, like, just move the plot aside for a moment and really focus in on these two characters. That scene was very intimate, very well done, very well written, very well acted, very well directed. And I was just like, okay. And it took me by surprise to have that much of a character focus in one of the new Star Trek films. And that's what made me think I was actually going to start liking the film. And I turned out to be right, thank God. I'm not actually sure what would have happened to Krall back in our universe, back in the Prime Star Trek universe. Yeah, exactly, Darkrai. I agree with you on that. Absolutely. There's this wonderful, wonderful... One of my favorite episodes of the original series is Conscience of the King. And one of the things I love about that episode is it's probably one of the most Kirk character-centric episodes of the original series, where we really see the flawed man that Kirk is, the human. And it's very intimate and very emotional. There's no big threat in that episode. There's no A-plot. I've talked about this so much lately as I've been going through Voyager. There's no A-plot where just suddenly there's a threat to the ship because there has to be a threat to the ship, There was no threat to the ship. It was all about the characters. And that was what I was most reminded of when Kirk was lamenting, his hatred of this man and how much he just wanted to kill him because he wanted to kill him, and how much he hated himself for that, and just all of that good stuff was what I was reminded of when I saw that earlier scene. Anyways, hang on. So let me check one other quick thing here. Make sure I've talked about all the major points I want to. I have. That'd be awesome, Kemek. Especially since their swan song was frickin' Nemesis. I mean, come on. I know, Darkstar. And then they called it back out on in the dinner scene at the end, which was pretty cool. Also, that's exactly what I'm about to talk about, Dakota. That's my final point that I have. I like the fact that Jayla was basically being rewarded with entry into Starfleet. I know that sounds weird, but as I think I've made very, very clear, Starfleet's basically a frickin' paradise compared to most other things in fact and fiction. Being able to be a part of that is something that should be treated as a good thing, in my opinion. It should be the kind of thing that's like, yes, this is awesome. And the fact that she was so obviously, leaning in that direction, and they obviously, wanted that, I liked that a lot. And I liked the way they presented that. Like I've talked about on the Voyager show many times, being on Voyager compared to most people in the Delta Quadrant would basically be paradise. It's one of the things I've actually said in defense of Neelix many times, that Neelix should want to be on Voyager, should want to stay there, because Voyager is basically paradise compared to all the other places he could be. Um, hey, Blood Brother, what's up? McCoy and Spock, Rory. Okay, so Homo sapiens only club, present company accepted, of course. Here's my final point, and if anybody else has anything, we'll talk, and then I'll just cut it off. So, uh, the wave scene. There's a scene where Krall sees the Franklin come back, and obviously him going after it with all that he has makes a lot of sense. A, it's the crew who knows he's there, so he wants to kill them because he hates them. He hates Kirk, he hates all them. And B, and probably more importantly, that's his old ship that he probably absolutely despises the sight of. So the thought that he would bring his whole fleet into the obvious trap actually makes a lot of sense. And I like that. But the other reason I want to mention this, though, is because two things about that scene were incredibly awesome. First of all, it was the exact kind of absolutely enthusiastic cheese that made me grin from ear to ear. My sister was laughing like the whole scene, and the music choice was perfect for it. No joke. That was absolutely amazing. And there's this great thing right in the middle of it where it's like, it cuts to the station, cuts to the Yorktown, they're like, we figured, we know the frequency to rebroadcast it. Well, we broadcast it then. They just start absolutely obliterating them. Oh my god, it was so great. It was, I have no complaints about that scene. Because there's two things that were great about that scene. Yeah, the classical music line. It was a great, enthusiastic, funny, awesome moment of incredible crowning amazingness, because this giant swarm that had absolutely obliterated the Enterprise was being torn apart and torn to shreds without using technobabble. And this is the second point. This is the second reason I liked it. Let's discuss what technobabble is very, very quickly, okay? Technobabble is nonsense. Technobabble is something that when you are writing the script, it's like, okay, and then we will have to tech in order to get out of the tech. This is not a joke. If you've ever read any of the scripts of TNG or the original series or anything, that is literally what it says in the script. They literally write the word tech there, and then there's another group of people who come in and write nonsense in place of tech. That's technobabble. It's gibberish. It's a lame thing that seems to imply that technology is basically just magic. That it can just do anything and for whatever. It's also very lazy writing, in my blunt opinion, because it basically is just whisking the problem away. You're not out gearing the problem, to use a gaming term. You don't have better gear than the enemy, you don't have better numbers than the enemy, and you can't outthink or out-cunning the enemy. So you just tech the problem away. This was one of my biggest problems with Star Trek Generations, Star Trek 7. How does the Enterprise D, a Galaxy-class cruiser with one of the best crews in the fleet, defeat a 20-year-old bird of prey? Do they defeat it through, the fact that they're in a better ship in every way? Even without the shields, they're still in a better ship in every way. Do they defeat it by outthinking them? Do they defeat it by outmaneuvering them? Do they think it by trying to use their cunning and knowledge and their experience with the Duras sisters? No. They use technobabble. They use bullcrap to defeat them. It's probably one of the worst examples of technobabble in all of Star Trek, in my opinion. It's ridiculous. How do they defeat the swarm in this movie? Do they write tech into the thing? No. How do you coordinate a massive... Remember, they've already established these are drones. As someone in chat pointed out, there's like 3 or 4, or I don't know the exact number, but there's this very, very, very small number of actual people over there. Very small. So how exactly do they coordinate that whole swarm? Well, it makes sense. They would have to have some kind of complicated pattern, some kind of radio, basically, in order to keep them all functioning. That makes perfect sense. So how do you defeat them? You disrupt the radio so they can no longer coordinate. And with that many ships moving in this tight of a formation, I mean, they're literally feet from each other. The fact that they would all literally collide with each other and explode makes perfect sense. I like that. It is a logical, non-technobabble solution to a very serious problem. Even the fact that they had to get at super close range made sense. Because of course they do. It's radio. I mean, in space. I mean, think about that for a moment. So, yeah, they blow up the drone control. And the drones just kind of... everything the movie indicated to me was that the drones were also... Or, excuse me, the ship drones were also drones. There might have been humanoid drones in the drone ships. I don't know. So yeah. In general, the solution to the problem of the giant swarm was great, and the fact that the scene was wonderfully cheesy and awesome was great. That was probably, in terms of sheer awesome factor, for lack of a better term, was the best moment in the entire episode, in the entire movie for me. There were some better character moments, but that moment was just, yeah, loved that. Not a perfect movie by any means, but very, very high up on the list. Someone earlier asked me to name my top 10 Star Treks. I can only go down to about 5. Then I'd have to really start thinking about it. But I can do 5 right off the top of my head. 6, 2, 8, 4, whatever number this one is. Beyond. The most recent one. This is my top 5 right there in order. Because, yeah. Real quick thing I want to toss out. This is just an anecdote. Someone, while we were driving up there, he mentioned the idea, well, do you think this is the Borg? And I said, no. He says, well, do you think it's the Weyun? And I was like, well... Or not Weyun. I said the wrong thing. The Vorta. And I thought that was such an interesting idea, that this was a different perspective on some of the races of the Dominion. Obviously it wasn't. The order, again, is 6, Indiscovered Country, at the top of the list. 2, Wrath of Khan, right beneath it. 8, First Contact. 4, Voyage Home. And 14, because it counts, Star Trek Beyond. There's the list. There's my top 5. Mining technology is actually pretty dangerous if you think about it. I mean, consider what mining actually is. You know, that's some serious stuff they're doing. Anyways, does anyone else have any other thoughts before I cut it off? A whole race of Jeffrey Combs. Sold. The fight with Krall and Kirk at the end was really cool. There was, again, some smart writing there. The fact that they had to... The gravity working the way it did actually made tons of sense, and I liked that. And the fact that Kirk was basically still trying to talk him down, very Kirk, made a lot of sense. I also very much liked the fact that I'm sure I was the only one who thought this, but Kirk didn't die because he wasn't alone. Kirk's always known he'll die alone. Well, you guys are doing the movie night thing today, Takoida, so no more stream for the remainder of the evening. Yeah, no kidding, psychotic. The theme of Jayla being left behind and alone. I gotta say, the scene where she watches the planet spiraling away from them. Wow. That actually was a very strong scene. Much stronger than I thought it actually would be, you know. I thought that was very powerful. And very impacting. I was very impressed by that. What do you mean, Darkrai? Just drop metal on him. Oh no, I know what you mean. I liked it. I loved it. Absolutely. Yeah, at the end, it in loving memory of Leonard Nimoy and for Anton were both mentioned there. Do I think Krall will ever show up in the Prime Universe? He might show up in Star Trek Online, but otherwise, no. Did the song in the first trailer fit in the movie? Well, the first trailer was garbage, but I don't remember the song that was playing in it, to be completely honest with you. Anton Yelchin, Chekhov. He's dead. He died at a very young age, at the big start of a very promising acting career. And it sucks. Why was there a bike on the NX? Actually, that makes a kind of degree of sense based on what we saw in Enterprise. I'll agree it was for the plot, but I didn't mind it too much. Oh, it was the same song, okay. So then, yeah, the song actually worked in the actual movie. It was an awesome scene. Um, the they had so much random stuff from home on the old NX ships that it kind of made a degree of sense that someone would bring along their frickin' bike. In the same sense that it made sense for me that Garibaldi had that bike that he was trying to restore on Babylon 5. Similar concept. So that didn't really bother me, even though that was for the plot. You want a plot hole? I'll give you a plot hole. When they're beaming the bike out, the bike's already running. As in going full speed, like 60 miles an hour. Just think about that for a moment. Seriously, think about that for a moment. How did they do that? It wasn't like they beamed out and then they started going. The anyways. No spirit of memory. I always got the impression that he ate the rest of his crew. If you know what I mean. Unity is my strength as well. Real quick, the scene where he ate the other people was actually horrifying. Like, that scene actually disturbed me a bit and made me think I was watching a horror flick for just that one scene. It was really messed up. I would also point out that this was an old transporter, Enterprise-era transporter, which barely worked. Yes, but that's not the problem, Nerdman. Where was it moving to begin with? Was he just driving it on the hull to be beamed out? I agree, Darkrai, absolutely. Does Krall remind me of Gul'dan? No, not at all. Actually, they do mention in the movie where he got the power to eat people. It's the alien tech, the same tech that gave him the drone technology, allowed you to consume others in order to live. So, well, because we don't talk about super blood. I got a better question, Nerdman. Why didn't they use super blood to save all lives forever? I mean, think about it for a moment. They saved Kirk from massive radiation overdose. Do you know what radiation does to a planet? Person? It does it to a planet, too, but I mean, seriously, if you have any idea of what radiation does to a person, the fact that Superblood can cure that is ridiculous. It's one of the things I hated about that. So, I mean, if we're counting that as canon, then they should be fine forever. Not quite, Deutsch. Yeah, exactly. The Superblood, gotta say it right, is pure fictional fantasy magic. Like, not even sensical magic. It's just, yep, you're good. Section 31's like, let's take that and use it forever. For the good of the Federation, of course. And then there's a coup, and then Section 31 takes over, and they win because they can't die, because Superblood. It's okay, Zeiss. Khan lived, remember? Metastatic radiation. Um, yeah, it can rebuild DNA. It also brought a Tribble back to life. If you don't understand why that's weird, try getting a blood transfusion from a dog sometime. Tell me how it works out for you. I'm not sure, Nerdman, why he reverts and then is rebuilt. Like, I'm really not sure. You'd think it would just, like, regenerate him to the point where he was, but, whatever. Which character is my favorite in this movie? I think you would, Luxia, yes. Favorite character? That's actually really tough. I really liked the presentation of Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Jayla. All four of those were brilliant characters, so I can't really pick from one of the four. So there's your answer. If you put a gun to my head, I'll go with Spock. New Spock, obviously. Oh, that would be horrible, Nerdman. It's okay, he had no sentience. Or sapience. They made a point of that, actually, to try and emphasize that they weren't killing the new Spock. No, they didn't explain how a lot of the tech was on the planet. They also didn't explain how a lot of the other races landed on the planet. There was always this implication that plenty of races had landed on the planet or been lured there or whatever, and they never really explained that, and I kind of wish they'd gone into a little more deal to that rather than just assuming that this planet in the middle of a frickin' nebula has lots of people landing on it. Yes, absolutely a victory for ensemble casts. Very good ensemble presentation. Like I said, Uhura was the only character who well, Uhura and Sulu didn't really have a lot to do, but for the same reason. Yes, Nerdman. Except for the fact that the original being, well, they leave it vague on purpose. So you could define it as either the original Spock's soul, or his memories, or his sentience and sapience, however you want to define it, is what goes into the new clone, yes. Hey, Sergey. Welcome to the end of my stream. By the way, I'm going to go and give a plug here. Deutsch, give me the link in a minute, if you're assuming you're listening, because I don't have it. Uh, you all viewers, who are awesome, are going to be doing another movie night in like half an hour, I think, something like that. What time is it? It's an hour. It's like 6 minutes or an hour from now. I'm not sure which one. It's either 6 minutes or an hour and 6 minutes. Um, and they're watching Elves, and it's awesome. And I think that's cool, and I think it should be a thing. And if you're interested in just having some MST3K fun with it, thank you, Frozen. Oh, and there's Deutsch's thing too. It's tons of fun, and they've been having fun with it. I'm trying to plug it as much as possible so more people are involved in it. So that's cool. I actually agree with Spirit. If Kroll hadn't waited, he might not. Whatever. Um, that would be up to individual interpretation, Nerdman. Depends on if you define, what you define as an individual, which is something we haven't even defined in real life. So hey, um, Elves is kind of a horror movie, yes, with big. Well, let's not quote it. It's an absolutely terrible horror flick. It's bad. It's so bad. Hence the Mystery Science Theater 3000 tint that I mentioned earlier. Many other movies are planned for the movie night thing, though. So if you happen to not have an interest in Elves, please at least keep that in mind. They're doing other movies. They've got a big old list of movies they're going to be going through in the future. Eru, I've been actually working on. In fact, I literally have something in uh, Corel right now. I know you can't see it, but I just pulled it up. That I'm working on to try and make it a little bit easier to for people to realize that I'm an EST. I still don't know why the plugin doesn't say EST automatically. I really don't know. I need to look into that. I literally have it set to EST. I don't know why it doesn't do that. But anyways, I'm going to chop this off, guys. So, movie night, have fun. I will not be joining you. I've got other things to do, unfortunately. Uh, but you guys have a good one, and I will see you later.